Ego and Archetype, Part 10. So we're almost at the end of chapter 3, but we're not even halfway through the book. We're still a little bit away from halfway. In the early stages of psychological development, God is hidden in the cleverest hiding place of all, in identification with oneself, one's own ego. This idea of the hidden God corresponds to the Gnostic myth of Sophia, a personification of the wisdom of God. In the process of creation, Sophia, the divine wisdom, descended into matter. And then in the course of that descent, she became lost and imprisoned in matter, thus becoming the hidden God, which is in need of release and redemption. This notion of the divine spirit imprisoned in matter, hidden in the darkness of the mind, represents the self, hidden in identification with the ego. Matter, which is hiding, Sophia, symbolizes the concrete, temporal, earthy reality of the individual ego. If God is imprisoned in matter, in the immature personality, the task of psychological development is no less than the redemption of God by human consciousness. Wow. Here we go, huh? Here we go. It's already started. The task of psychological development is no less than the redemption of God by human consciousness. The redemption of God was a theme basic to alchemy. The alchemical opus was a work of redemption. The whole process of transmutation attempted to release and redeem a supreme value from its bondage in base matter. The base matter was the prima materia, the stuff that one started with, corresponding to the inflated immaturities of one's own psyche. This was to be transformed into the philosopher's stone. Oh man. A divine essence. The prima materia is our ego self-identity, the residue of original inflation. To submit this material to the alchemical process means to apply conscious effort and attention to the task of refining and separating this composite mixture to the end that the self or archetypal psyche will be freed from its contamination with the ego. This is page 102. I'm definitely going to highlight this page. This is so far probably the most powerful page so far. There is a contrast between the conventional Christian attitude, which has the theme of passive redemption of man through faith in Christ, and the alchemical attitude, which is an active effort by man to redeem God. About this contrast, Jung writes, opus to the autonomous divine figure in the alchemical attitude. Man takes upon himself the duty of carrying out the redeeming opus and attributes the state of suffering and consequent need of redemption to the anima mundi. imprisoned in matter. End of quote. And again, the alchemical opus is the labor of man, the Redeemer, in the cause of the divine world soul slumbering and awaiting redemption in matter. The Christian earns the fruits of grace from the work performed by Christ. But the alchemist creates for himself, by his own effort, a panacea of life. Paraphrase slightly. End of quote. Modern man is obliged to proceed in much the same way as the alchemist. If he has no recourse to passive redemption by the mediation of sacred images, he must rely on his own active efforts to work on his own primal material, the unconscious, in hopes of releasing and bringing to awareness the suprapersonal nature of the psyche itself. This is the central theme. Psychological development in all its phases is a redemptive process. The goal is to redeem by conscious realization the hidden self, hidden in unconscious identification with the ego. The repetitive cycle of inflation and alienation is superseded by the conscious process of individuation when awareness of the reality of the ego self-axis occurs. Once the reality of the transpersonal center has been experienced, a dialectic process between ego and self can, to some extent, replace the previous pendulum swing between inflation and alienation. But the dialogue of individuation is not possible as long as the ego thinks that everything in the psyche is of its own making. About this mistaken attitude, Jung says, all modern people feel alone in the world of the psyche because they assume that there is nothing that they have not made up. This is the very best demonstration of our God Almightiness, which simply comes from the fact that we think we have invented everything physical, that nothing would be done if we did not do it. For that, this is our basic idea, and it is an extraordinary assumption. Then one is all alone in one's psyche, exactly like the Creator before the creation. End of quote. For the modern man, a conscious encounter with the autonomous archetypal psyche is equivalent to the discovery of God. After such an experience, he is no longer alone in his psyche and his whole worldview is altered. He is freed to a large extent from projections of the self onto secular aims and objects. He's released from the tendency to identify with any particular partisan faction, which might lead him to live out the conflict of opposites in the outer world. Such a person is consciously committed to the process of individuation. The I Ching describes the effect an individuated person can have. In nature, a holy seriousness is to be seen in the fact that natural occurrences are uniformly subject to law. Contemplation of the divine meaning underlying the workings of the universe gives to the man who is called upon to influence others the means of producing like effects. This requires that power of inner concentration which religious contemplation develops in great men strong in faith. It enables them to apprehend the mysterious and divine laws of life, and by means of profoundest inner concentration, they give expression to these laws in their own persons. Thus, a hidden spiritual power emanates from them, influencing and dominating others without their being aware of how it happens. Hidden spiritual power emanates from them. That's the end of the quote. Stated in the broadest possible terms, individuation seems to be the innate urge of life to realize itself consciously. The transpersonal life energy in the process of self-unfolding uses human consciousness, a product of itself, as an instrument for its own self-realization. A glimpse of this process gives one a new perspective on the vicissitudes of human life and makes one realize that though the mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind exceeding fine.